On this episode of my series, Forgotten Classics, we're going to talk about a movie made by an Italian master director. A movie that nobody knows about. That's part of the premise of my series. Great movies, but no one really knows about it, and they're hard to access. This movie by Roberto Rosselini, I had never heard of until I found it buried on the Criterion Channel's website. And I decided, I'm going to watch this because the title was so interesting to me. It sounded like it was bad science fiction. In the movie, the English translation of the title is The Machine That Kills Bad People. Let's talk about why I think you might want to go seek this movie out, why it's pretty good to great, and why this would be part of my series Forgotten Classics. It's The Machine That Kills Bad People, coming up next. So if you're Italian, you might want to tell us if the English translation is correct. This title, The Machine That Kills Bad People, it sounds like a schlocky B-movie, science fiction movie out of the 1950s to me. I thought it was going to be like an episode of the Twilight Zone. And it is in part, at least a little bit, but this is a happier sort of comedy effort on Rossellini's part. Now, as you might know, Rossellini is one of the founding fathers of Italian NeoRealism, which has been influential on all of movie history throughout the entire world for the last 70 plus years. But as Rossellini made movies and we got into the late 40s, early 50s, he was interested at expanding the definition of realism and stretching out what that means by realism. So he's got a movie in which he's got a comedy that has a lot of realism in it. It's definitely about poor people in Italy, but it has a fantasy premise. And this does remind me of a happy episode of the Twilight Zone, or if you're a fan like me of Black Mirror, the BBC, and then the Netflix series, this is a nicer, happier, much lighter version of that. The premise is haunting and deadly, but then the tone of this movie is pretty lighthearted. The movie is about a photographer on the Amalfi Coast, beautiful area. I've toured there in a small town. I think it's actually Amalfi. But before that, the movie opens with American tourists coming to Amalfi and saying, we want to buy part of this so that we can set up a tourist trap to get American tourists to come here, those guys and gals who fought in World War II and want to see where they landed in Italy when they were invading and trying to kick the Nazis out. And then immediately these American tourists run over an old guy.
Bande luminarie, giostre e processioni, tutto fornito da lui. Affari d'oro, vedrete.
Well, this old guy then in the next scene pops up and he's alive. What the heck's going on here? In this Italian town, they're having the Feast of St. Andrew. And it becomes apparent pretty quickly that this older man whom these American tourists have hit, but yet is still alive, might actually be an incarnation of St. Andrew himself. Well, then things develop a little bit in the movie. We get to know this photographer a little bit. And at one point, St. Andrew pops up, or this old guy pops up into the photographer's apartment and says, I don't like the injustices of the world just like you. I'm going to grant you the ability to have your camera kill people. So St. Andrew takes a photograph of a photograph, and the person in the photograph whom he takes a shot of actually ends up dying. The person who died was a nasty sort of person, and so this actually ends up in blessings. The very next day, they get a whole haul of fish in the town, and the Italian government has granted this town lots and lots of lira, millions of lira, a huge amount of money to do with as they please.
In seguito alle numerose domande rivolte da codesto comune al Ministero dei Lavori Pubblici, la segreteria del Ministero ha il piacere di comunicarvi che la domanda stessa è stata accolta e che è stato concesso un contributo straordinario di 11 milioni. 15 milioni! Lo stesso comune dovrà deliberare come disporre lo stanziamento della somma secondo le necessità.
Well, it would seem like this photographer's ability to take a picture with this camera and kill off really terrible, nasty people is a blessing. And for a while, the town is going really well until, people get jealous, they get envious, they all want the money for their own good. And pretty soon, the photographer is using his camera to knock off all these people who at the beginning of the movie were fine or not so bad, and they've turned into bad people because of this huge grant of money the Italian government has given this town. But with the power to kill off people with a camera, this is a great, great metaphor for Italian neorealism, for, film and photography in general. Because I think a lot of directors, they want to right the wrongs of the world. They want to end the injustices in the world. So what do? They make a movie, they take a photograph, and they try to make you feel as if you need to be on their side and get you motivated to do just things.
Io tengo l'arma miracolosa che farà trionfare la giustizia.
Celestino, non dire fesserie.
Signor.
But sometimes people try to do just things, they end up doing worse injustices. That's exactly, I think, what happens in this movie. The photographer, takes pictures of people, they die, and he thinks the world's getting better, but in fact the world's getting a lot worse, perhaps. And so you can see through this premise, I think, given the way I've described it, the photographer thinks he's the greatest person in the world because, he's the one who's going to right the injustices in this town, but ends up he's becoming a killer. And so the person who wants ultimate justice and is out to get it, a social justice activist as it were, is the one who's the nastiest, meanest, most terrible person. So some of the questions come up. Who's the St. Andrew guy? What's he doing in the town? But really, I think this movie is about the 20th century's ambivalence about the photographic medium, particularly film, and how people use cameras in order to get things done in the world, in order to, be moralistic or moralize. And of course, that was a premise of Italian neorealism. They're going to make movies about the poor, about the destitute people in the world, whether they're prostitutes, people who are out of work, the unemployed. They'll get you to sympathize with them, and then you may become, whatever they think you should become, a socialist, a communist, or just someone who's on the side of compassion. And yet, film lies at times or film misdirects, and certainly viewers can see a movie. And I think that's one of the major threats of trying to use a camera in order to become a social justice or just an activist for justice. In this case, in this movie, the photographer is taking pictures of people, and then they just end up acting worse and worse. As he's offing people with his camera, the ones who are left behind end up becoming the ones who are nastier.
11 milioni. Ho scritto all'arcivescovo perché il consiglio comunale deve destinarli a questa opera santa. Quante preghiere per ottenere questa grazia. Insomma, hai capito, Celestino, hai capito, sì o no?
Now, at least that's how I read this movie. I really like this premise a lot. I think Black Mirror could take it and run with it, probably. This is a science fiction premise for sure, which is really what I like about it, but also it's got the fantasy element of this appearing figure who seems to be an angel or a devil or demon, St. Andrew or whatever he is. You'll find out late in the movie. And so now you've got neorealism with an element of science fiction and an element of fantasy. This is what I like, and it's a social satire. This really fits what I like, and in fact the directors that I like. For example, and this is a movie that got absolutely panned at the movie theater about 3 years ago. One of my favorite directors, Alexander Payne, he made a movie called Downsizing, which the Matt Damon character becomes little in order to get a lot of money and save the environment. It's a really funny movie. I actually appreciate the humor in it quite a bit. This movie has that sort of sensibility to it. And so I highly recommend trying The Machine That Kills Bad People. Now, I'd like to tell you that you can find it easily. I personally did a search on my library and tried to get this movie on DVD. I found one copy in one library in Germany. That can't possibly be right, but it looks to me like there are no DVDs with English translations. Hopefully the Italians watching this can correct me, and hopefully there comes out at some point a DVD or Blu-ray of this movie. But for now, hopefully you can find this on the Criterion channel. Maybe, just maybe, it's on YouTube somewhere. Thanks for watching this. Please leave a comment if you wish, and subscribe to my channel for more great movie content. Thank you, and have a great day.